This is the Mindside Podcast with Dr. Bhrett McCabe. In these episodes, we explore the mystery of mental performance. What makes us tick? What really gets us going? We find the answers on the Mindside Podcast. For more about how we work with athletes, visit us at themindside.com.
The Mindside Podcast is brought to you by Arcos Golf, golf's first fully automatic GPS and shot tracking system. Your stats are instantly available on your smartphone after every swing. For more information, visit arcosgolf.com. The Mindside Podcast is also brought to you by Dr. McCabe's new book, The Mindside Manifesto. The Mindside Manifesto will help you develop a competitive mindset within and beyond the game. The Mindside Manifesto is available to order from our website, themindside.com, as well as amazon.com.
Welcome back to the Mindside Podcast. 2017 is definitely well on our way now, and hopefully everybody's living up to their resolutions and following through with the things that they need to do. You know, on the podcast over the last couple of years, we've focused on people who have overcome stuff to reach their goals. Today's no different. Today's James Roberts, Paralympian, somebody who has achieved great things and now has moved into the world of coaching and motivation and things like that. And I want to talk to you today, James, about kind of your pathway and how you found your lane a little bit, because you went through a variety of different ways, but what it takes from a mental standpoint to compete at an Olympic level, but also to do it and to do it in the face of overcoming some struggles. So welcome.
Thanks for having me on, Brett.
So tell our listener, everybody, it's interesting when we talk about Paralympic Games or we talk about adaptive athletes, everybody has a different pathway of how they got there. And I think that's always fascinating. And as a psychologist, I'm always trying to figure out the way we get there. Was it from a tragic accident? Was it from a birth defect? Was it from an illness? Does it have different psychological underpinnings? Tell us about how you ended up in this position.
Well, I grew up my upbringing was such that I come from a military background. My father was in the US Air Force and my mother worked for NATO. So I spent about 19 years of my life, obviously, in that environment. To come back to the point of how I got into the Paralympic sport, initially I started out in able-bodied sport from, it would have been about the age of 8. I started in karate, moved on to ten-pin bowling, and then eventually moved on to swimming when I was about 11 or 12 and kind of progressed through there. And it wasn't till I was about 15 years old when a coach asked me, had I thought about ever doing disability sport? And I was kind of taken aback by that comment. I kind of agreed, okay, I see where you're coming from. I'd come back to speak with my mother at home, and we were kind of saying, well, why would I want to do that when I can compete within reason with my able-bodied peers? So I think it was a few weeks later, because we were living in Belgium at the time, my head coach was also the head coach for another swimming team within the Belgian leagues, and he knew of a disability coach. So he got in touch with him and got me his details, and I went down to their club. I think it would have been a couple months later, and say, okay, I'll give it a crack, see what it's like. Did the training session. My mum was on the sidelines with the team management, and I think the recollection I have of it is that my mum told me that the coaches, I think they had the perception that I'd be one of the normal swimmers, like run of the mill, but they once they saw me training, my mum said their eyes lit up. And to kind of cut a long story short, I ended up being one of the better swimmers in that club. And from those early days, 3 of us went on to Paralympic success. One happened to stay within swimming and competed in It would have been off the top of the head, I think it was Sydney and Athens, and then the two other of us in the club. I went on to compete in Beijing and in London. He's subsequently he went on to go into tennis and has made 3 Paralympics. So he's kind of gone one up on the two of us. The two of us didn't end up competing in swimming. I went on to obviously go into rowing and compete in rowing in Beijing, and then subsequently do volleyball in London.
So what's fascinating to me is you were competing against able-bodied with a limitation.
Yep.
What was your limitation for our listener? I mean, I know, but just tell our listeners.
Well, the medical term for it is femoral dysplasia. So to explain to the listeners, in simple terms, I don't have a femur. I've got a small tibia. No, I get this right. I've got a small tibia and small femur, but no fibula. And then that is attached to my hip. So I've got this. It was kind of a weird one to actually explain without being able to see it. I've got the bottom half of my leg, so no knee, and then also I've got a floating hip, so I've got no actual hip socket. So it's quite an unusual disability. So
how did you compete against able-bodied athletes? That's pretty incredible. I mean, in swimming, so you were just using tremendous upper body strength in one leg to do all your propulsion, right?
Yep. I've never really thought about it. Obviously, that league, which is the European Forces Swim League, is not the strongest league relative to, say, when I went obviously to swim in the Belgian league. It's not as strong as that. It's pretty. I think a lot of the swimmers at the higher level of the league went on to swim at college level, be it the American ones would be, I think, Division 2, Division 3. There is some cases where there has been swimmers go on to Division 1 programs. So to kind of put it into context, it would be how they set it up is obviously you compete against the clock. So it would be heats against similar people of similar ability. So it'd be a case of that. And then to kind of put it in perspective, from my perspective, I had coaches early doors would say, let's use my upper body strength to my advantage. So I started swimming butterfly, would have been probably a couple of years younger than physiologically somebody at my age probably should do, because it's not the easiest stroke technically to master.
No kidding.
And then you need to be fairly coordinated and probably somewhat stronger upper body wise, more so than the other strokes.
So when you did that, then you transferred to the Paralympic training pathway type, in a sense. Talk to me about, was there a moment where you looked at that and you said, I've been competing against able-bodied, and now I'm switching to this, that in a mind you thought, I got this pretty much covered, and realized, yeah, that was a mistake?
Trying to think back to that. Maybe a little bit, but that was probably before I got into the movement, because obviously I was a teenager at the time. So I'm thinking, why would I change and kind of go to, I won't say stretch myself, but look at it from, I probably looked down on that sport and that movement, because obviously my disability, in the grand scheme of things, now I've competed in that movement, I'm one of the least, how would I put it, least impaired individuals, because there's more severe disabilities than what I've got. And in most cases, probably a lot of the people in the higher classifications do compete in able-bodied sport just to test themselves a little bit. And to kind of answer your question, Brett, probably so, because the earlier days were probably harder than I thought they would be. Obviously, in Belgium, it was probably a little bit easier, but when I came back to the UK and kind of pushed my career on a little bit more, it was a lot harder because obviously we're one of the better nations in Paralympic sport. So it probably was. It kind of, I had to reevaluate where I was at and say, well, if I really want to push on this, I've got to kind of change my mindset.
So talk to me about the difference between, in your mind, pursuing the Paralympic dream and pursuing another professional dream. I mean, everybody has limitations in life. But what I'm always fascinated about with Paralympians and individuals who compete in adaptive sports is the abilities are more highlighted than the disabilities, and yet that is in stark contrast to what we see with the average person. Average athlete who's able-bodied. They tend to focus more on their disabilities, but the Paralympian, the adaptive athlete, tends to focus more on their abilities. Talk to me about that.
I think I've been asked that a few times now. I think we focus more on our abilities because we've obviously overcome that disability and have to deal with it on a day-to-day basis. So we kind of don't dwell upon it. It's like, well, this is the hand I've been dealt. There's no point dwelling upon it. I can't change it. And I think with me and athletes who've made it onto that, we kind of use it to a certain extent as motivation because, okay, I've had to endure different types of adversity all through my life, be it as a youngster, just being able to play alongside my peers. So that's one. And there's a few others that I can't think at this present moment. But I don't generally let it, how would I say it, overcome me and let it dictate how I do things in life, because okay, there is certain times that I will use it to my advantage, but generally I don't. It's one of those things. It's you kind of play that card. Well, most people with disability play it when it suits them, but I don't want to kind of use it as an excuse because I have a disability. I would rather you look at, and this is what annoys me from a TV perspective, is they like, and we discussed it a few weeks ago, that they like to use a background story to show how that person got there, and it's like, well, I don't care where you've come from, what troubles you've had to overcome, and it would probably be the same with the other person. You're there to compete, and you want to be. But isn't that
funny though? But when we watch the Olympics here in the United States, they do these long form video essays about people's tragedies they've overcome in life, and it's usually about losing a loved one or having some amazing thing that they've had to overcome. And yet in the Paralympic Games or Paralympic athletes, we're dealing with athletes that are having to do that on a daily basis. I'm just overcoming hip replacement surgery while we're doing this interview, and and I think back to my dad, who is I'm sitting there, and my dad, who was in the last 10 years of his life, needed assistance and needed physical support to walk, and I go out to local just to a restaurant right now, and I've got my walker, my cane, and I'm exhausted by the time I get back, and I look at things and I'm like, man, those steps are too upright, or they're not very adaptive, and I'm finding myself looking at that, and I'm like, the little things I'm taking so for granted in normal day-to-day living, and you guys are doing this every single day. So I can't even think about competing about that on an athletic environment.
Oh, but I think we look at it from a different one. We want to be looked upon as being an equal to the Olympic guys. Okay, to a certain extent, you could probably look at it from a different way. Do we train harder than them to a certain extent? Because obviously we're having to overcome the disability, and be it the more severe disabilities, obviously is going to be a lot harder. So to kind of put it into context, do we work harder than they do to get to that level? It's like, well, possibly, but it's trying to get that recognition that we are athletes as well. Okay, they like to use that terminology, disability, whatever, disability sports, and then it's like, well, at the end of the day, yes, I have a disability, I have an impairment, and I'm doing sport, but at the end of the day, it's still sport.
Yeah. So talk to me about preparing for the Paralympic Games and from that perspective of having to overcome and how to train and the sports that you competed in, but, also champions is champions and training is training and hard work is hard work. It doesn't matter what we are coming from. Talk to me about the mindset that is required to compete at that level.
Do you want me to cover both of them or
Yeah.
look at them as separate entities?
I mean, do either way you want.
If I cover one, because the training is slightly different from rowing to volleyball. I think with rowing,
Brutal.
I kind of got involved in that sport when it was in its not its infancy, but its early days. So it has transformed massively from when I stopped. Well, the sport.
Rowing in general is a cardiovascular killer. I mean, it is a brutal sport.
Well, it's not just cardiovascular. It kind of incorporates, what have you got? Sprint. There's a sprint element in there, some power. So it kind of it's not one focus. So it's a brutal one from that one. So to kind of put the training in perspective, or I think in the lead up to Beijing, what was I training? It's about 30 hours a week. And then that would incorporate, obviously, gym work, cardiovascular training, different elements, sprint training, just to get, obviously, the body up to optimum condition. So there was some hard sessions. There's, to put it in perspective for the listeners, there's some training within that sport I do miss, and there's others I don't miss them whatsoever. And I think those are more the mental side of those ones, because with how my event was designed is obviously it was very much trunk and arms, so I'm not using my legs at all. Well, to some degree, a little bit, but the power's being generated from obviously my back and my trunk. So when we had to do training on the row machine, because obviously you generate all your power from your trunk, obviously when you're leaning forward, you're obviously crushing your lungs. So the harder it got, you weren't getting oxygen in. So it's a definite a mindset one from that one, because you're thinking, well, I'm the rest is getting little and little, and I'm not it feels like I'm not getting any oxygen in when I'm getting rest. So it's thinking it's more of a mental battle then from that training perspective. And then
so during that time, so when you're talking about that kind of mental battle, I mean, is there a point, I'm just going to be a naive, and so don't take this question the wrong way. Is there a moment that you're like, I've overcome so much, I can do this? Or is it, I know if I'm in a hard thing, I look at the things that I've overcome in my life and I use that, or people, that I know in my life who've overcome hard things, and I'm like, you've done this before, you can do it again. I mean, what drives you as motivation when it gets tough?
When it gets tough, well, I think I look at it more now. I put it into perspective now. I've gone into coaching. I think when I'm having bad days in coaching, I'm thinking, what if I was still doing sports? So you're thinking from a mindset perspective. I'm quite nuts, because it's quite a brutal environment, be it physically, mentally, and you're thinking, well, I'd still want to go back. So there's a certain element when you say, what drives me? There's different connotations to that because it was a nice lifestyle. I got to travel to different parts of the world. Okay, for some aspects it was for competition. Some of them was obviously to do hard work and training camps. So we're going to this nice warm place for a reason, so we can get the training done. So from that perspective, it can be looked at from a good and bad situation. But I think to what drives me from the motivational standpoint is from a sports perspective, obviously the Paralympics is the pinnacle, so it's trying to get back up to that level every single time as much as you can. Obviously now I'm not doing it anymore, so it's people say to me, "Oh, you could still go." It's like, well, I'd rather stop now than think, oh, if I did keep going and the performance wasn't up to the standard I expect from myself, you kind of coming back to the point, well, there'll be like what ifs. Well, what if I did this? So it's kind of being, you're kind of reflecting on it in a bad way. Whereas now that I have stopped, I can kind of look back on my career. Okay, I've not achieved the heights of getting Paralympic medals, gold medals. Okay, that's not the end of the world, because how I look at it now, I was able to compete at 2 Paralympic Games. That's nothing to sniff at. I competed at a high level for 10 years. So I've done fair. I was, in my eyes, I was successful-ish. I've got, how would we say it, medals from World Cups. Okay, in rowing terms, that's like the lowest, but I still won one of those events, so that's nothing to sniff at. I've been lucky enough to have national records to a certain extent. Within the rowing field, I was never beaten. So, at domestic level, I was never beaten. So that's a nice accolade to have. Okay, would I have been beaten if I wasn't reclassified? I don't know. I'd like to think possibly not, but we'll never know.
Right. Do you have regret?
What about stopping?
Yeah.
Sometimes, and then when people bring it up, oh, you could have competed in Rio. It's like, I can see where you're coming from a physical standpoint. Yes, I'm physically fit to be able to compete at that level, but it helps that is my profession now in terms of personal training. I have to be aesthetically, how would I put it, pleasing. I have to look fit because that is my shop window. I have to look like I'm in good condition, because I can't say to somebody, oh, you need to do this type of training, and I'm not fit myself. It's like a bit of a double standard. It's like, well, I want to set a good example. So from that perspective, that person said to me, yes, I can believe that to be true. I'm only 30 years old, so it was still physically possible to have competed in Rio. Within reason, I could have probably still made Tokyo and back to back and made 4 games in a row. But I got to a point, or when would it have been? It would have been about 2 years ago. I got sciatica in my back, and it was kind of, that was the catalyst to kind of say, well, do I really want to do this? But to do this to my body day in, day out for the next, at that time, okay, it was 2 years out from Rio, for the next 2 years. And I was like, not really. I've done it for 10 years. What is this actually going to do to my body in the long run?
So let me ask you this. Do you guys then, okay, so you're talking about sacrifice, which is huge. Do you guys in Paralympians, do you find that, would you say that you have more, less than, or not as much sacrifice you have to make to succeed?
In relation to what?
To the able-bodied athlete.
I wouldn't want to generalize there. For me, personally, it's a yes and no question. Yes, because obviously the disability to some extent, well, with my disability personally, I've got obviously scoliosis of the spine. So in some cases, exercise will speed that, back problems up, but then also it will keep me in a good physical state. So it's kind of one of those, it's kind of twofold. It kind of cancels each other out. But from the no standpoint, not really, because all athletes have had to sacrifice something or another, be it their social life to a certain extent, balancing it with, if they did go into further education, balancing the two. So not really. I think all athletes have had to do some sort of sacrifice.
Yeah, but I mean, come on. Do you find? I get that though, but do you find that because Paralympians have? I mean, I think it's fair to say. I mean, I think you guys have more challenges to have to overcome in order to reach the goal.
That's a fair point. But I think it comes back to that point earlier, that you want to be perceived as an equal to your able-bodied peer. So you don't want to kind of.
You don't have a chip on your shoulder. You don't have an excuse. But I guess I'm pushing here a little bit. Is that, I would almost think that there is a sense of more accomplishment, or more like after the sacrifice, after the achievement has been made, the value of the sacrifice has been respected more. I mean, if I take a look at an athlete who, let's say, is a sprinter, able-bodied sprinter, that's all they've grown up to know. They go to the track every day. They train. They've got training centers. They got people falling all over them to stretch them, to get their muscles moving in the right direction and healing. From college and youth sports, everything. They're just, everything that they're doing is built around them, being successful in this environment. Or as a Paralympian, you have to fight to be on that stage a little bit harder. Now, granted, maybe the pool of competition is deeper in the able-bodied. Maybe, elite athletes who are at a sense of having a, coming at it from an adaptive sport mentality, maybe the pool's not as deep. So people like you who are elite athletes can move a little faster through the competition. You have more advantages. Whereas maybe in the able-bodied, there might be 10 of you at the race versus 4 of you. But I would think that you guys have to sacrifice more. I mean, you're having to look at alternative training methods. You're having to look at adaptive mechanisms. Everything is having to be done with an eye for making it work for us, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's definitely the case. But then you've got that support network. Once you've made that step to elite level, you've got the same support networks in place. So from that aspect, I would disagree. But obviously, coming up through the stages, yes, you've got to obviously have a good coach who will adapt it and get the best out of you. Say it from, especially with rowing, for me is concerned, it was getting specialist seating equipment that I could get the best out of myself, because obviously with not having the same glute definition, if I'm sitting normally, I'm kind of slouched to one side. So from a sporting perspective, I was when I was transferring power on one side, through the water, it wasn't even, and that was one of the problems. So we had to look at it from that perspective. How can I limit that being a problem in the long run? Okay, didn't solve it completely, but it was almost symmetrical, the power outputs from one side to the other. So I was probably more productive, but that was probably something you couldn't change unless you'd gone and had me quite early on and been able to change the biomechanics, whereas that was how I operate, sitting down. So there's not much you can change, because that's how I've adapted to be able to do a movement. So unless you went back early doors and changed that, there's not much else you couldn't get it to 100%. You probably would never be able to get to 100% anyway, but you'd probably try to get, I don't know, 90, 95. And I think it was about 85 to 90%. So it was as close as you could get to perfect.
Yeah. All right. So let me ask you this as we wrap it up. Now you train people of all abilities and all faculties and all different career goals. What do you see as we have as our own disabilities and our own training? What do you see when you're training folks in that perspective, and how do you help people overcome them?
I think it comes back to that mindset. It's trying to find the root cause as to why somebody is doing something, be it from a nutritional perspective, or why are you stuck in that rut? So it's trying to go back to the root cause, and people will say, well, I want to achieve this. Yeah, but why are you doing that in the first place? So it's kind of harping back to the root cause, and it's the same with fitness. And then it's trying to make people more look at it from a mindset perspective and a psychological one as to why they are doing things and why can't they get out and change their lifestyle. So it happens back. I could probably generalize to a certain extent. Everybody is the same, and it's something in the fitness industry we probably shy away from a little bit. We don't look at the psychology as to why somebody's stuck in a rut, why they can't. Well, obviously, with it coming up to Christmas, people have got obviously those New Year's resolutions to, I want to get fitter, I want to lose weight. So it harpens back to that. It's like, well, if you want to change it for the new year, if it's a strong enough goal, why can't you change it now? So it comes back to that. It's putting it in perspective as to, if it's a strong enough goal, why can't you do it? What's holding you back from doing it now? Kind of mentality.
So the goal is, and you're right. I mean, there's a theory in psychology called the health beliefs model. And the idea is that when we make changes, and this is why New Year's resolutions really don't stick, is that when we make changes, we're often making changes away from something. Very rarely are we making changes towards something. So, and that's why so if you go to the physician and your doctor tells you, listen, your blood sugar is running high, you need to make some lifestyle changes, because if not, you're going to have diabetes. We get really motivated, we lose weight, we exercise, and then we get out of the danger zone. And then what do you think happens? Our behavior stops because the fear is no longer relevant. So in the health beliefs model, there's a balance that happens between, is the benefit of what I need to do worse, or stronger, or more effective than the potential of or the risk of if I don't do it. And so there's this multiple decisional balance that happens. That's why New Year's resolutions, people think when they're making changes is that I'm going to go from 0 to 100 of exercise. I'm going to go from not exercising at all to 5 days a week and eating right. And what I always try to tell people is do one thing. Just do one thing more. Do one thing different. If it's a dietary change, take one meal a day and make it a thought-provoking meal. You don't have to eat broccoli and salad every single day, but make a better choice at breakfast when you have more psychological willpower. It's hard at dinner, but if you start the day off every single day with something smart for breakfast, at least you win that. And then eventually you could grow it to winning breakfast and lunch, then breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And then let's add a little bit more activity. Let's take the stairs than the elevator. And because if not, the only thing that we're motivated by is fear. And I think that's what's so fascinating to me by Paralympians and Olympians is you're working towards a goal, but in the Paralympian world, you're also having to overcome a fear of a potential of sedentary lifestyle for somebody with disabilities is sometimes a death sentence. More so than the able-bodied folks. Agree?
Well, that's probably fact. For me, I come from a healthy-ish family, so
yeah, but you're active, so. Yeah, exactly. But I mean, if you took an experience of having limitations and said, I'm not going to do anything, some of the limitations that you have that I don't have, okay, by nature are going to probably be a little quicker on you than they are on me. Because the strengths in your compensatory models aren't going to work as well. And you need all that to work, right? So if you shut down, so I think that's why we need to get working. So I think as we leave this, I think as people, we need to understand, and I want you to give, a final soundbite here to our listeners out there who are contemplating making these changes as somebody who's a Paralympian who's overcoming some challenges and done it successfully. What is the final salvo that you want to leave these folks with?
If you have a goal in mind, be it long term, short term, medium term, obviously it comes back to that commitment, and it's having that commitment and belief that you will succeed in what you want to achieve, and it's better to have that support network behind you, because it's going to help you on the long run when you get stuck in those difficult moments, to be able to keep going. And it's obviously it's kind of trying to push the negative people away, because those are people that want to see you fail, so you want to have that good support network around you to help you, as I said, in those tough times when your motivation isn't at its greatest, to make you continue on that journey and to get you to push on to reach that goal.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
No problem at all, Brett.
All right. Well, here's to a great 2017, and we will talk to you then. I appreciate your time on this, and let's continue to go out there and do great things.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Mindside Podcast. To learn more about Dr. Bhrett McCabe and how the Mindside is helping athletes with sports and performance psychology, visit themindside.com.